Now we're going to just dive right in. So welcome everybody. So we've got quite the crowd today, mostly Seattle, but I did see people from Canada and Baton Rouge, Atlanta, and Denver. So thanks for joining us. And Mike, thanks for being here today.
Thank you.
And also happy birthday to your lovely 77-year-old dog. So today we are talking about succession plans and ownership transitions. And the goal of ownership transition is really to keep the firm intact by having a transition plan, keeping it operating smoothly in the future, whether someone retires or winding down in their firm or other people joining for a longer game plan. So you want the firm to continue on, and that process you can't start soon enough. So usually this is the owner's responsibility to plan for this, but by having some educational preparation like today for leadership, this path can be made open to you. And so that's what we're doing here. And if you're an owner here on this, you don't want your key people to walk out the door. If you make a path for leadership, they'll stay, they'll take the firm to the next level. So we're going to cover a ton of ground today. And Mike, I'll share your PDF afterwards. And he's just going to go from beginning to end of what type of person is considered, funding the transition, taxes, leadership skills. And like I mentioned, feel free to just raise your hand or ask questions in the chat box, just because there's so much to cover. And then use him as a resource afterwards. He actually put our plan together for Cross too. He's also an advisor and an investor in our firm and part-time therapist to us sometimes. So Mike is president of A&E Ownership Transfer Planning, which he built and sold an insurance firm specializing in architects and engineers. That company placed over 4,500 design firms nationwide. So he literally is the best of the best. He has an MBA from Harvard Business School, civil engineering degree from UW. He's held stock ownership positions in 5 different firms, participated in the board of directors. He's a speaker, a seminar leader, and he also plays and sings on the guitar. So you just kind of do it all.
But not today.
But I thought we were going to kind of save that for the end, but we'll see if there's time. And like I mentioned, we're leaving 30 minutes at the end. So anybody who needs to hop off at 1, feel free to do so. And we'll keep recording and then you can catch the last 30 minutes if you need to hop off. So we're going to go ahead and hand it on over to Mike. And then I think, Mike, do you want me to start the first poll or?
Yeah, I mean, that's about me. And so the first poll is about you guys. So let's do that. And that gives me an idea what roles you fill in your firm. Brittany sent me the list of people that are registered. So I see we got architects and engineering firms both, but I'm not sure your role within the firm. So if you could.
Starting to get some results in. I'm going to leave it up for a couple, probably like a minute or two. We've got a couple owners, Mike. 5 office managers or administrative assistants, HR. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and end it and share the results, Mike. So you should be able to see those now.
Oh, cool. A lot of office managers, administrative managers, owners, human resources, and accounting people. Excellent. I call my kind of people. Got it.
And then 3 people who do all things.
Oh, yeah, well, when I see the word owner, that's what I think right there. Someone got to do everything. Anything that's not being done, that's what you have to do. So. All right, so I'll dive in. This is about ownership transfer planning, and this topic I can talk for 8 hours and cover the same material with the same slides. It doesn't mean I'll be rushing, but it does mean I'll be brief about each one, and it is an overview of the entire topic. And I'm going to start with the fact that for consulting engineering firms or architects, that there's kind of this strategy wheel that that I use, that there are numerous areas of operation that need to be organized and managed. And if you were to write a strategic plan for the firm, I don't think it's any more difficult than to take these 6 areas and not write down what you're doing, but write down what you plan to do differently in each of those areas. That whole document would probably be less than 5 or 6 pages, but would in the end be almost a statement in your own mind of what you would do in your firm next year differently than this year, and make sure that you're addressing each of the areas that are of key strategic concern to a firm. Well, certainly one of them is ownership transfer planning. I actually got into this business when I was 26 years old, just came out of business school, came back to Seattle, which was my home. Went to work for a consulting firm and to architects and engineers. And one of the clients that we had 5 of these 6 things working just fine with them. But within months of starting to work with them on project management methodologies, they announced that they had to get involved in an acquisition, and I helped negotiate their sale. This is Valentine, Fisher and Tomlinson, sold them to Kaufman Engineers. I think it's nothing secret now, 30 plus years later. There isn't even any military secrets that are valuable after that length of time. But they sold because they didn't have an ownership transfer plan. And that set about my effort to figure out what they should have done. Made a presentation back in 1985 to the Consulting Engineering Council of Washington and Oregon, a combined meeting, and led to a series of assignments where now there's been 250 plus firms have put together this ownership transfer plan using this approach that I'll be describing today. The point about it is that it's kind of a holistic system of incentivizing performance, rewarding performance, giving performers the opportunity to invest, enticing them into that investment, rewarding them if they make that investment, and then doubling down again. It ultimately builds a meritocracy, a firm that is focused on performance and succeeding, and rewards those people within their organization that are helping them accomplish their strategic goals. It becomes an integral part, if not one of the strongest drivers of the firm's culture. And so it's more than just the mechanics, which I'll be talking a fair amount about, but it's really an entire system.
And Mike, I'm sorry.
Yes. Yeah.
Is there any way we can rotate, or because it's a little hard, as people in the chat box would like to know, if you could zoom in on the PowerPoint, or is it playing full screen?
Rotate. Now you're asking me for the thing that I fear most. So if
I interrupted your flow, I'm sorry.
Brittany, I was able to just zoom in, like pinching my screen. I don't know if others have that option.
Awesome. Yeah, I could do the same too. So Mike, if you're not able to.
I'm not able to. I could spend 20 minutes on it.
Okay, well, I shared it with everybody, so you guys can just download it from the chat box or zoom in like EB recommended.
All right. So why do we need an ownership transfer plan? One is, if we have an ownership transfer plan, we can get professionals to commit to the organization, because this organization would then allow them to grow professionally and have influence over their careers and participate in the firm's ownership. These are things that are very attractive to particularly high-performing engineers and architects. If you can involve them in the ownership, you will have a better chance of retaining them throughout their careers. In some ways, they will feel like they are working for themselves. To some extent, they are. And so they won't be leaving you to start their own firm or to join some other firm for an opportunity to play a significant role in their careers. Companies that encourage performance and then reward it and recognize it and then reward it, get more of it. And meritocracies are more profitable. I got some fact coming up later, but there are 12 firms 24 firms, I think, if the number's there when we get there, that I just said, well, how are they doing? How is this collection of firms I'm involved in every year doing? And they always send me their financial statements, and I value a lot of them. So I opened up and I recorded each one. So, and added them up and divided by the number I had, the average profitability that is pre-distribution, pre-bonuses, pre-retirement plan contribution, pre-taxes, the average profitability of that group is 24.7%. Even that number shocked me. It's been a good era. Last year was a good year. The whole COVID thing was usually pretty good for architects and engineers. And it's amazing how meritocracies are able to make money. Firms with an ownership transfer plan will survive the retirement of the firm's founders and carry on generation after generation. So the need for an ownership transfer plan is because it will build you a sustainable long-term firm. It also encourages a culture of collaboration and cooperation that's fostered by an ownership transfer plan. Because if you are a significant owner within an organization, it isn't just about your performance. You want the organization to perform. You want other people to succeed within in order for the business to do well, so your investment will do well. And it creates a more collaborative organization if more people are participating in the ownership. So in the end, it can help you retain these key staff, increase the firm's profitability, and help you grow your practice, because the growth is also a way to enhance your investment. Some organizations will get to a certain size and say, well, we just like it this size. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. But if you are rewarded for growth, you're more likely to remain open to growth. Your clients tend to demand that you grow over time, just serving your existing client base as they expand, and then they introduce you to others through referrals, and other people come along and see what you do and want that too. And it is normal for a firm to grow at 10 to 15% a year for decade after decade. I often have firms say, well, what I plan is I'll just run a firm and I won't transfer ownership, and in the end, I'll sell the firm to an acquiring firm. That's not uncommon to have that as a strategy that then allows you to think, I don't need an ownership transfer plan. And my response to that is that if you're partially implemented in an internal ownership transfer plan, you end up with a much higher sale price when you actually do go to sell your firm at that point in time. The reason is the buyer knows that the founders are selling because they want out. And their question is not who's leaving, but who's staying. And if they can see who the owners are within the organization, and you have a collection of people who've invested in the firm, then they look very carefully at those people and recognize that those are the individuals that they're buying, in a sense, buying when they buy the firm. And so they will pay a higher price for a firm that has a partially implemented ownership transfer plan. Now, I'll ask people a lot in the room, do you have an internal ownership transfer plan? And then these questions to ask about it. And let's run this poll question now, because I'd like to see if you guys have, and if you're implementing an internal ownership transfer plan within your firm.
Awesome.
So there's a series of questions here then, Brittany? Or are there two questions?
I've got just the question of, is your firm implementing an ownership transfer? And so,
and there we go. 83% say yes. And one says, I have no idea, but I don't believe that. That's just another way of saying no, because you would know. Yeah. And my question is yes, if you take the same, and just, can you change your answer on this poll if they wanted to now?
I could relaunch it for sure.
Just relaunch the same poll and I'll ask the question slightly differently.
Okay, let's do it again. And
Because the acid test question, you have an ownership transfer plan. That is, you probably have a valuation, an agreement, a performance bonus plan, a long-term plan for how you will transfer. But the question is, are you actually annually transferring shares to up-and-coming employees every year? And if let's just use last year as the year. Did you do that last year?
yeah,
That's the answer I would expect. We could hear the 83% yes. Now of the yeses, we've got 80% no and 20% yes.
flip-flopped for sure.
It flip-flops. The issue is having a structure for internal ownership transfer and actually implementing an internal ownership transfer plan are two different things. And yeah, you can skip a year or two, but if firms skip a year or two, then they end up skipping 3 or 4. If they skip 4, they can skip 8. They skip 10 and they don't have a plan. Their window is long and it has to remain open, and firms need to progress all along the way in order to actually finish an internal ownership transfer plan. So the key is to have one and to actually implement it. And here's why. This is why. How long does it take to internally transfer 100% of the firm's ownership? And I would say with the plan based solely on the direct sale of shares to employees, it takes about 20 years to implement an internal ownership transfer plan. Now that breaks down to that requires the involvement of the founder for about 15 years. And then it's followed by about 5-year payout of their final block sale. So if you can sell about 25 to 30% of the firm at one time and retire and get paid safely over the next 5 years for that. So if you're within 15 years of retirement, then you are in the final window of an internal ownership transfer plan. And as many firms I have will start when their founders have 30 years left to go, and they'll incrementally walk, and they might move a little slower in that direction. They're not in a hurry because the time is on their side. But the firms that start early finish, and the firms that start late sometimes run out of time. Now, if you add an employee stock ownership plan to the process, you can take about 5 years off the process. And so if an ESOP is added, the process can take a minimum of 5 years, followed by a 5-year payout for the final purchase. So we've done one of those in that period of time. We usually like to take a little bit longer too, but an employee stock ownership definitely reduces the 20-year plan to a 10-year plan. And I have some numbers in the back that show how and why that can actually happen. But starting the process early increases the chances of actually completing it. And the corollary to that is starting and continuing on an annual incremental basis is what's essential in order to make the plan work. So we have some objectives we're trying to accomplish. First is we're trying to provide an opportunity for key employees to become owners of the business. We know that they will attain them better if we do. We'll help them enjoy their careers more. They will have a more important role with regard to helping the firm grow if they are partially owners. And then we've got 3 competing financial interests that we're constantly trying to balance. And one is we have to provide for the financial health and continuation of the business as existing owners retire. Well, the owner leaves, they need their money out. The firm's got to pay that money out. We can't cripple the financial health of the firm. So we have to look out for the capital that's in the firm throughout the entire transfer period. We're also trying to create a market for the stock that guarantees the funding of stock repurchases of both retiring and or departing shareholders. Anyone that owns shares is usually bound in an agreement that says when they leave, the firm will buy their shares and pay for it at a fixed formula value. Or the valuation changes, but the formula doesn't, and then make those payments over usually a 5-year period of time. Well, that honoring that guarantee means that if a large block of stock leaves, there's a required significant financial transaction that will then come against the firm. And so we're now balancing the need to make sure there's liquidity for people who leave and the firm's financial capital needs. And then the last competing financial interest of the owners who are ongoing, they need to be rewarded for their financial investment in the firm. And it's one thing to say, well, they'll buy it at a cheap price and 25 years later, they will sell it at a higher price. Yeah, that's kind of feels like putting all your eggs in the one basket. It's much better if you could say, well, you buy shares and then about 15 to 20% of the value of that shares comes back to you in an owner dividend or a owner bonus, and then you reinvest it and that money keeps coming back to you. And when someone says, what's your return? It's like, well, I've got an ongoing 15 to 20% return and another 10 to 15% share price increase on a compounded basis. That if you have a blended return of both cash on cash return and long-term capital gain, you have the kind of return that you're interested in as an owner, not just to buy it and pray that 25 years later it'll be worth more. So we have these three competing financial interests that we're constantly trying to satisfy on an ongoing basis. So I'm going to be discussing kind of two basic approaches, although they're not highly different. It's like vanilla and French vanilla in the end, because there aren't so many ways to do this. But my preferred approach is direct sale of shares to key employees. You offer individuals the opportunity to buy their shares for cash on an annual basis. And then we can add to that direct sales, but we add to it an employee stock ownership plan. And that's kind of the approach I'll be talking about today. But what I'm avoiding in doing all that is stock grants. That is any process where someone says, yes, but I'm going to give stock to some of my key employees. No, please don't. Anything that you would give away today will not be valued tomorrow when you try to sell it. And when you want out of the firm, you want some money out of the firm. If people have been whetted their appetite on gifts of stock, you will never be able to get them to see the value of that stock. If you can encourage them and demonstrate to them the value of the stock and they've been buying it annually, they can actually welcome the opportunity to buy the stock when it's retirement time, because then they know what they're getting for their money, something that gives them an adequate return on their invested capital. There's other ways that firms say, well, we want to get them to feel like they're participating, but not actually participating. And stock appreciation rights and phantom stock, two things listed here, both fall into that category where they don't actually own stock, but they can enjoy some participation in how the stock would perform if they actually owned it. We're trying to create a sustainable corporation to go generation to generation, and you can't do it by offering phantom stock or stock rights that aren't actual stock. So I like to transact in the common shares of the firm, ultimately transferring the majority and ultimately all the shares to a next generation over the generation span. And I'm also trying to avoid in that process discounts or special offers of any kind. We're trying to establish the understanding that the stock is worth what you're charging for it. They're able to buy it. They can afford to buy it with their after-tax cash flows that they're getting over and above their base wages, and that they get an adequate return on their investment so that they feel good about making that investment. Sometimes we do use incentive stock options or ISOs, and we can also sometimes provide financing for stock purchases by key employees. I say sometimes, again, I try to avoid the financing, and often when the employee stock ownership plan is in place, incentive stock options become a natural add to the whole process. So my direct ownership transfer, what do I mean? That means either the company or an existing stockholder ultimately sells shares to an employee. If it's the company that's selling shares, the company gets the cash for the sale. If it's an existing stockholder, then the individual that's selling their shares gets cash. A lot of times, if you have a founder, an existing stockholder that owns 100% of the firm, it wouldn't be uncommon for them to pay a performance bonus to their employees and sell some of their direct stock to the key employee. But after a while, when there gets to be a lot of people involved, it's usually better that we end up migrating towards having the company make all these transactions. Even when the existing stockholder is not interested in selling stock, the company can sell stock, raise that money, and then use that money, kind of hoard it, stack it up in a pile and wait, invest it properly, and then use it ultimately to redeem the founder stock at a future date. Certainly, a properly capitalized corporation is usually much better prepared to take advantage of growth opportunities. And so it's not uncommon with this approach that if you're using the company to keep the capital from stock sales, the company ends up with a better balance sheet and can have a more confident financial investment stance. Back here.
Mike, it
here.
might be a good time to do a quick little chat.
Yeah.
Anybody want to touch on some of the topics we've gone over yet? I don't see any questions in the chat. So is the pace working for everybody?
This is where someone asks something like, I don't know what he's talking about. Always helps. Just
Yeah,
throw that in if you want.
no, it's a lot of information to digest. Sarah Davies asks, what might be an option for an LLC?
Identical, and there's not anything different here other than the nomenclature of members versus shareholders and participation percentage instead of shares, or sometimes we use the word shares in an LLC. It's really not any different. It works.
Beautiful.
Direct ownership transfer. The documents that are involved in this type of ownership approach are listed here. It's an agreement, aka a buy-sell agreement. I call it a stock purchase and sale agreement, but it lays down the terms upon which someone leaving the firm will have their shares purchased, the formula for that repurchase, and the term upon which that note would be paid off for that purchase. It's kind of the standing guarantee that if you own shares and you leave, you'll get them repurchased. We then put to that an offer letter, simple statement that says we're offering you your shares at this price, you can buy them. Your acceptance, so yes, I want to buy them, and then you end up cutting a check, you end up with some shares. When you leave later in your career and you sell your shares, you end up with a promissory note for the redemption of those shares, the guarantee, which is collateralized by the shares that you've actually sold. And that's the final point, the security agreement. The company shares are actually the collateral for the note. When you sell them to the company and the company hasn't paid you in full for them, you end up with a note with a collateral agreement for the shares that you sold. That's the whole collection of kind of legal documents on top of the firm's standard articles of corporation and bylaws. And the process, pretty straightforward. It's an annual offer of shares to key employees, an annual valuation of the firm based on its performance and applied to the formula value. And then firms kind of have an embedded profit distribution policy. It can certainly vary it a little bit, but it does make it clear that its intention is to pay a certain percentage of its profit to performing employees each year with subjective ability to allocate it as they see fit to where that performance is, but that the percentage that they will pay of their profit is relatively fixed. And then that is the fuel upon which employees who are performing well, who get enough of that bonus, will pay their income tax on their bonus and have enough money, usually to buy the annual offer of shares each year. And then overall, we end up modeling that, showing what can happen over a 10, 11-year period of time if we follow these rules, make the offers, pay out the bonuses, pay the taxes, encourage the reinvestment. We can show the progress that will take place and the return that individuals will get, what the wealth will be of each party involved, what the capitalization will be of the firm. And in the end, we can demonstrate that the plan is working. Process, again, is surprisingly simple. It's each year the board of directors decides who should be offered shares. There's an annual valuation of those shares and an annual offer of shares. They simply offer to the selected employees the right to buy some shares. The employee can accept or reject that offer. If they're making those purchases, they're making them with after-tax savings, and it's funded by their performance bonus and their shareholder distributions. Now, if they don't own any shares, they don't get any shareholder distribution, but after they purchased some last year, out comes some return for being an owner on top of a performance bonus. Those are two streams of income. Pay their taxes on those twos and have the money. And the result of all that is the gradual transfer of stock each year. Again, it wouldn't be unusual for after a bonus and sale of stock, if you imagine that 5% of the firm's ownership would turn over. And if you continued to do that on an annual basis for 20 years, you have 100% of the stock turn over. That's kind of the analysis that it takes 20 years, another way of getting to the analysis that it takes 20 to implement one of these plans. But the second half of that is that individuals who've been buying for 10 years are getting a significant amount of owner distributions, and they have those funds. So the ability and the cash flow in the hands of potential buyers is higher in the later years than it is in the early years. So when you start out, it's not uncommon to only move about 3% of the ownership each year 3% and 3.2% and 3.5% and then maybe 4%. And then after you get 5 years, 10 years into it, then you can actually sell 5, 7, or 8% of the firm a year based on the investment of individuals who've been buying for years, now getting significant dividends and still willing to reinvest those on an annual basis back in the ownership. So ownership transfer is usually not quite linear. It's based on the more ownership you've transferred, the easier it is to transfer the second half, let's say, than the first half.
I love that point. Got a couple questions on that in the chat box.
Yeah.
No, let's see, we have one question and they're saying we're a small firm, single owner, single buyer, 4 people in the office. What differences should we expect?
What differences?
From this?
I would say that if you, the hardest choice at that point is how many people you want to participate. It's usually not all 4. Not that there isn't a reason why it couldn't be, but the key is that in the end, firms tend to about half of their employees end up being owners with this approach, and sometimes even 60% of the employees, but usually not 100%. And with a small group, maybe 1 or 2 of them would be the individuals you'd want to start transacting with. That's about the only difference. This works in a small firm, it works in a large firm. And at least this component works in very large firms. We'll get to the ESOP as kind of the second component that most larger firms then add.
Awesome. Did that answer your question, I hope? And then another question, what happens if the owner dies?
The owner dies is we take a key person in life insurance is an integral part of this, that particularly when there's a small firm and there's that standing guarantee, the owner themselves, the firm themselves pays for in life insurance that would pay sufficient amount to have the firm have the repurchase price. And when that happens, then the founders paid off their value with the life insurance proceeds from the key person insurance, and the remaining employees are in some ways the windfall beneficiaries of that transaction. That doesn't mean they're willing to push you down the stairs, but it does mean they can get involved in investing their own money, knowing that if something like that does happen, that they're in fact not getting damaged financially by that transaction. So key person insurance is critically important, and we encourage it for any owner that's over 10% should have key person insurance on them and get it before something develops that makes them uninsurable.
So what would happen if it was too late and there was a primary owner and they were uninsurable?
We have a more difficult situation because we can't insure them, and the buyers do not necessarily have the same protection that they would have otherwise. So it can definitely tip over the apple cart.
All right.
They don't have a simple solution for that.
Yeah. And then one last one from Carrie, and she says, I've only seen fast transfers 4 to 5 years. Any advantages to doing smaller percentages over longer terms?
Yes, tremendous advantages. The ultimately is that as you pick your team will evolve, and it is not uncommon that if you have a rigid team and you're trying to do it in a quick period of time, you have a one-time pick of who they are, and they all have to perform in and through. But that's somewhat unrealistic. If you had 5 people on that next team, the statistics would indicate that 3 out of 5 of them are still going to be stars in 5 years, and 2 of them maybe not. One break even, 1 bad. It's just, and then you need to evolve. And so it's important over a longer period of time that the people that may get you, first base and around second base are not the people that get you from third to home. And for firms that we've been with for 20 years, again and again, there's in every 5-year period, who the key players were was a constantly evolving story. And that long horizon gives you enough time to work through all that.
Perfect answer. I love it.
So I think it's critical that employees buy their shares. And again, start with this, and then somewhere along the way, someone will say, well, they're not buying. I think it would be just easier if I just gave them the shares. Then they would, that's income to them. The value of the stock is given in their W-2, but then I don't give them the choice of whether to buy or not. And then I can be more sure that the shares will transfer. And I thought, well, that's a great solution. Except for now we have a real problem. We don't know if the employee ever wanted to buy the shares in the first place.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important for these reasons I'm about to list that people buy their shares. It shows that the employee is willing to invest in your company's leadership and future. And the employee that has thrift and the discipline to save and invest. Those are two different things, widely different, but you do not want your ownership in the hands of an individual that doesn't have thrift as a value. They'll act with the corporation's money the same way they act with their own, and it will just be a matter of time before they take you places where you can't afford to go. If there's any doubts about the firm's leadership, I don't think they're overcome by giving away stock. They're only overcome by addressing what are the concerns or the individuals that have those concerns. I'm not sure the problem always lies with the accused, but those issues do not lead to a strong, let's say, long-term partnership where someone is not supportive of your leadership and the direction that you're taking the firm. Employees that invest are at risk, and they will protect their investment. If they've been given the stock, they don't feel that they have the same value. It might be on paper, but it isn't as if they bought it. Somebody will protect their investment after they make it, and you want them to have that value in their decision making. And if they've made that decision themselves, they will encourage their peers to invest alongside them. I think the real key is actions speak louder than words, and that encouragement doesn't need to be anything more than I bought it. And they ask, well, what do you think I should? I did. There isn't any more to say. Oh, I think you should. I think you should think about it. But I did. And anyone who has that position is going to be a leader. They will figure out why they made that decision. They will analyze their investment, and they're much more likely to make it. If somebody said, well, I have stock because I was given some, it just doesn't motivate. Employees will not invest if they are not committed long-term to the company. So a lot of times people have, their quiet private plan of I'm here for 5 years and then I'm going to, I don't know, move somewhere else, move next to parents, grandparents, follow my kids, could be anything. But it's not, I don't plan to be here, and you give them the offer to buy stock and they choose not to, and you finally ask them why you're not, and the answer is, I don't plan to be here. It's better that you not be giving stock to someone who doesn't plan to be there, because you'll just be repurchasing along the way. So it's best to find out if they're making a long-term commitment. You'll find out if they have thrift. You've certainly paid them enough money so that they have the money to make the investment if they wanted it. And if they feel there are problems with the company, and that doesn't mean with you, it's with the company, they'll speak up. It's not uncommon for me to hear someone back say, I'm all for it. I'm interested in coming in. I definitely want to invest. I like those other 4 individuals, but there's just one of those that you're bringing with us to the party that I don't feel so good about being with. And hard news to hear. The sooner you hear it, the better. So people do not even invest little amounts of money if they don't have confidence in what they're doing. And they are usually quite more honest than they would ever otherwise be about what their issues are when it comes down to why they're not going to invest their money. And the sooner you know, the better, because then you have the chance to address the issues, whatever they might be, and end up building a team that is committed and long-term. Again, embedded in the ownership transfer is a distribution policy. What do you plan to do with the money after you make it each year? And here's a typical one. It's right along this. Again, there's a slide at the end that I show some minor variation in this, but it's vanilla and French vanilla. How much do you put in the retirement plan? I'm modeling that you put about 3% into an ESOP or a 401k. a safe harbor level. It's nothing more. If it's an ESOP, that money is then used to buy stock. If it's a 401k, it just goes to mutual funds and doesn't come back to the company. So having this and adding an ESOP doesn't really change your rewards compensation structure. It just redirects it towards a different destination. Then you define an operating income as the 100% of what's left after you fund that retirement plan. And it's not uncommon for firms to pay about a third as a performance bonus. Another third goes out to owners in terms of an owner bonus. And the final 1/3 is retained in the firm. And quite usually that is a number very close to what is the non-cash profit. Non-cash profit is the growing accounts receivable of the firm, and firms are only paying taxes on their cash income, not their accrual income. So it's the share of profit that goes to your ever increasing, if the firm is growing accounts receivable, and it's the non-cash profit of the firm, the accrual profit, not the cash profit. They basically tend to pay out almost all of their cash and split it equally between performance bonus and equity bonus. I kind of said the same thing two different ways. I hope that you see that. Yeah, okay, it's the same thing. You're looking at it through two different lenses. But for me, it's really much closer to 1/3 because accrual profit is real profit. And we're proving it. Your firm wouldn't have much value at all if it wasn't, because 80% of all of the firm's assets are sitting in accounts receivable and work in process. An ownership transfer plan encourages a meritocracy, and that's the biggest point I would make, is that if we're implementing one of these things, it influences the culture of the firm. Not the first year, but over the long term, the firm's culture is different if you're implementing an internal ownership transfer plan. And I went and looked up a definition of meritocracy. It's a system organized or a society in which people are chosen and motivated into positions of success, power, and influence on the basis of their demonstrated abilities and merit. I think I got something going on in my ear telling me that's just not the way we do things anymore. Go ahead, screw up. This is the way you get a performing organization. Reward the people that deserve it and let them make the decisions for it. That's how you get there. And how in vogue or out of vogue it is in any given year doesn't mean it doesn't work. It works, and anything else can be proven not to work. So what are we talking about? There's an annual performance bonus to staff, and that is subjectively paid out to who the board of directors, who the leader, usually the owner, believes deserves it, earned it. A third of the firm's profit's going to go out that way. There isn't anyone who's not performing at some level. They're not performing equally. It's a distribution of where you subjectively reward performance as you see appropriate. More to higher performers, less to lower performers. And then annual offers are made to keepers. The question we asked is who should be offered shares? And my answer to that question is I think they should be offered to individuals within your employ that you think you'll keep for the rest of their careers. You might be wrong, but at the time you feel that way and you think that way. And if you have someone in your organization that's a high performer, but you're not sure you're going to be able to put up with it for that long, I'd keep them out of the ownership. That's going to drive a conversation you may not want to have, but sooner the better. There are also individuals that you not say, well, they're not professionals, they're not. It's whatever, however you want to dismiss someone that is absolutely key in your organization and you think you want to keep for their entire career. Why wouldn't you offer them some ownership? They're not getting a crown. It's not a diploma. It's a share. It's a share that they parted money with, of which they'll get a return on. And if you want them for the rest of the careers, involve them in the organization. So I've seen the receptionist, and rightfully so, get to be an owner because that person had the demeanor that caused clients to want to come to the firm. And that's part of what makes a firm successful. The decision by individuals to reinvest their after-tax bonuses, that is, we're funding and we know we need to ultimately pay individuals enough that they can afford to buy their shares in rough balance, but the money that they're getting is bonuses they have to pay income tax on. And so they're only really available to invest their after-tax amount. And then we end up assigning roles to individuals who are shareholders. We give them a management role and a shareholder meetings and their opportunity to have a voice, and they may participate in leadership committees, and they may ultimately become a member of the board of directors of the firm. So all of these things are very incremental, but what you would do in the first year and what you would do in the fifth year is usually significantly different. But ultimately, with investment comes responsibility and authority within organizations. And then you have your shareholder returns, because shareholders are getting both the bonuses that are driven as the 1/3 of the profit that's going to, and their share of those bonuses. And then the firm's price is probably increasing through the formula value, which is usually tied to the firm's profit and equity both. So again, here's that in red box. I did an average of now here are the real facts, 17 firms I have actively worked for in this last year, and there is 24.2% profit. So, and these aren't just the 17 that I work for, but these are the 17 that hand me their financial statements every year and ask me to do something with them. Now I'm going to flip and start talking about ESOPs. Hey, 12:47, keeping track of the time.
You're doing great.
All right. An employee stock ownership plan is an added feature to the firm's direct ownership plan. I don't have it supplant or take over or do it instead. It's a direct ownership, and then we add. Because what we have in direct ownership is that we choose the leaders, they choose themselves through their decisions to reinvest. They get to make the decisions, and the ESOP is funded by the firm. It's actually ownership on behalf of all employees, just like all the employees participate in your 401k profit sharing contribution. All firms participate in the ownership through an ESOP, not selected on merit, not necessarily given any authority to make decisions for the firm, but are the recipients of the returns from the performance of the firm. So I'd like to be sure that the leadership remains in the hands of selected individuals, while the opportunity to participate in the firm's returns falls in a much broader group of people, all the employees of the firm. Now, usually an ESOP is used to purchase between 30 and 50% of the ownership. We keep it below a majority, but above 30, because there's a tax break for being above 30. I'm not even sure if I'll get into it, but there is a tax break for getting there. It allows all employees to participate in your company's stock ownership. The ESOP is a qualified retirement plan. It's like a profit sharing plan. It is a profit sharing plan with the ability to invest in employer stock. The ESOP invests in both mutual funds and company shares. So it's got a little bit like a profit sharing plan, which would only be mutual funds, but then it has the other opportunity to invest in company shares. And the ESOPs are different in that the investments are trustee directed, not employee directed. So each employee doesn't choose what they want to do with their money, but the trustees decide to invest it in mutual funds for a while and then move it over into the direct ownership of shares, usually by buying some founder's stock as they want to reduce their ownership. And the shares in the company must be the ESOP's primary investment. That's over time. So in the end, the more the ESOP has, the more it has to ultimately put into the company shares. And then the ESOP can borrow money to buy company shares. I say that can buy shares. The ESOP plans I put in that don't have a lot of borrowing until maybe the founder leaves as a final move. Maybe half of that's financed. At that point, it's like a mortgage that's only 20% of the value of the house. I'm not interested in big leverage in the ESOPs. They're mostly great tax savings plans that don't require leverage, and with leverage, with borrowing, comes the possibility of disappointment. So when I use it, it's at the last minute for a very limited amount. And this ESOP works alongside a 401k. That is, the two sit there side by side in a firm, and employees defer their salary into the 401k, and then the company might match that, but they put their match into the ESOP, and they might make a profit sharing contribution into the ESOP. So it's a qualified retirement plan. It sits alongside a 401k. It's for the company's contributions, while employees continue to defer salary into a 401k and continue to direct those investments into mutual funds, while the trustees direct the investments that go into the ESOP, which are the company's contributions. How it works: 1, the company funds the ESOP with discretionary contributions and with a 401k match. 2, those contributions are allocated to all employees based on each employee's relative share of total compensation. It's kind of based on W-2, individual W-2 divided by the total W-2 of all the firm's employees. Employees' accounts vest with years of employment. We typically would use a 5-year vesting schedule. So people who have been there 5 years are fully vested, and individuals that just come or get allocations but don't vest until they've been there 5 years. Funds are invested in mutual funds for the first several years typically, but then those funds are redeployed and used to purchase company shares or founder shares. Well, certainly company shares always, but then whether the company selling those shares or the founder selling their shares, it'll be one or the other. And with this ESOP, all employees become indirect owners of the company. Indirect meaning they own the shares in their ESOP. They don't vote the shares, but they own the shares and they own the upside value associated with the share price increase. So how it works: continued, an ESOP is a retirement plan. Employees get their ESOP value paid to them at death, disability, or retirement. An annual appraisal is needed when you have an ESOP to establish the value of your company. And if the ESOP is used to purchase your shares, that is, you both have to have an ESOP and the ESOP has to buy shares. And at that point in time, the annual valuation is through appraisal, no longer by formula. We probably used a formula with the stock purchase and sale agreement, and we have to switch to an appraisal approach when we put an ESOP in and when that ESOP money is then used after several years to buy shares. Now, after that happens, the direct ownership is also transferred at the appraised value of the firm as established by the ESOP appraisal. So the total valuation of the firm is adjusted to appraisal instead of formula. And the ESOP ownership votes through appointed trustees, but there is an exception. If you ever get involved in an acquisition, someone offers to buy out your firm, that vote on that buyout is then passed through to all direct shareholders who always have a vote, and all ESOP owners who only get a vote in the event of an acquisition. So if a majority wants an acquisition, it happens. If they don't, they don't. So why are we doing this? We're kind of giving away stock. We're funding a retirement plan, using that retirement money to invest in the firm. Well, there's a huge tax advantage for this. And with the direct ownership plan, the firm redeems purchases stocks of a retiring shareholder. So let's look at the taxes associated with that transaction. And I can see I've left the numbers in to do this, the company needs to earn, it says 169, but it's not, it's 153. So watch, you'll use this 153,000 to provide a selling stockholder with 100,000 in a corporate redemption. If the firm makes $153,000 and pays 35% as federal income tax, then there's about $100,000 left after tax. And then if 100,000 is paid to a selling shareholder, that person has to pay capital gains tax of 20%. So the money that's left after $153,000 is made and taxes paid at both the corporate level and the long-term capital gain level, only $80,000 is left. So almost half the money is gone in the form of taxes. But with an ESOP, if you take that same $100,000 and you put it into an ESOP and then use it to buy shares from an individual, there is no taxation at the corporate level, and there is no taxation on the sale. Now, there's a qualification I would make. There is no taxation, or it's deferred, in fact, if the selling shareholder is selling to an ESOP that owns more than 30% of the firm and it invests that proceeds of the sale in qualified replacement property. It's like a real estate transaction, a 1031 exchange. This is a 1042 exchange. It allows you to defer capital gains, but you can use an ESOP, and instead of having to make 153 to give someone 80, you make $100,000 and the person walks away with $100,000. So given that more than half the total money goes out in taxes, the ESOP is extremely tax efficient relative to that, and that makes it desirable. So if we put one in, it helps assure the success of the firm's internal ownership transfer, because the firms can control the pace of that transfer in a way that's just not possible with direct ownership transfer. And by that, I mean, with direct ownership transfer, you make an offer and that offer is accepted or rejected. But with the ESOP, you fund the ESOP, and then the ESOP funds are used to buy shares of the firm. So none of the money disappears to taxes, and all of the money in it is used for that intended purpose. Where bonuses, some of that money is taxed away, and not everyone chooses to buy. And not everyone who's offered a bonus is in fact someone you want to offer shares to. So there's kind of three places where money slips away with the performance bonus method that doesn't slip away with the ESOP method. It has significant tax advantages over the other approaches, and as such, a higher valuation is justified by all this savings. I talked about how when you have an ESOP, now you get it appraised instead of formula valued. Well, it turns out that appraised value tends to be 25 to 50% higher than the formula value. And the reason it is because it is worth more given all the tax savings that comes from the ESOP. But with a properly designed and valued ESOP plan, everyone retires with more wealth. So I mentioned a model earlier, but if we put in and track all these profits, bonuses, how much each person has, what taxes they pay, where the money goes, what their return is, what the ESOP gets, when it buys, how much it buys, how much the firm is worth, we can track every individual's wealth. And an ESOP only makes sense when everyone's a winner. And everyone's a winner means those people that own the shares now and want to sell them end up wealthier if they adopt an ESOP. Those people that have some shares now but intend to buy more and ultimately retire with the ESOP in place will be wealthier. Those people that don't have any shares are going to start buying shares at a higher price when the ESOP is in place, but ultimately sell when the ESOP's in place are wealthier. And those people that are with the firm that are never going to get an offer, but do become an owner in the ESOP end up being wealthier. We make every group of interests wealthier by the use of an ESOP. And the key is understanding how to balance the system to make sure that that's true. And then we ask people, do you want an ESOP? And the answer gets to be, why wouldn't we if everyone's a winner? The firm's financial health is the final, and the firm's financial health is also improved and benefited. And so the overall confidence in the total ownership transfer plan can be increased because even direct owners are more confident to make their investment because they're more certain that the ESOP will be around to help buy their shares when they want to retire. And we do that all by the model. That model evaluates the affordability of proposed purchases by employees. We want to be sure that the bonuses are high enough so that after tax, they buy the shares that are offered. We know how much money the ESOP's been funded for a number of years. And so when it's ready to buy, how many shares it can buy, what percent of the firm it can buy. We can estimate annual share prices and the return on investment to shareholders from both distributions and share price increases. So we can demonstrate that that's a solid investment, that buying shares in the firm returns sufficient amount that you would justify the investment. It evaluates the firm's financial health throughout the transfer, the debt to equity ratio of the firm and how much needed working capital the firm would have as it grows. We want to demonstrate that the firm is usually debt-free throughout the entire process and never enters debt throughout the entire ownership transfer window. We can establish the pace of ownership transfer by how much we fund the ESOP and the bonuses, but we can demonstrate how long it will take to implement an internal ownership transfer plan with the model. It shows the interrelationship between the firm's value and the profit distribution policy. Those are not independent. The more you pay out, the lower the firm's value is. The less you pay out, the higher the firm's value is, but people can't afford to buy the firm if they're not getting enough. So we end up pay out more, the price comes down. So finally, they have enough money to buy the shares the way we value it over the horizon that we have. That's kind of all the math of figuring out we have a functioning plan. And we can model different scenarios of future growth and profitability. What anyone sees in the future can vary, and we can test and demonstrate how different future scenarios impact the ownership transfer plan. And we can compare two scenarios of ownership transfer. And this is what I always end up doing, is comparing a direct transfer only and a direct transfer plus an ESOP, and demonstrate why you would even want to add an ESOP in the first place. Now this is small, so if on your side you can expand this, this would be very helpful.
And Mike, while everyone's in, we're at 1 o'clock. So for anybody who has to hop off but wants to chat, I'll ask Mike a question right now. To open up the floor for a second.
Yeah, and we got 2 more slides, so not that far off, I guess.
You're doing great, and it's a lot of content in a little bit of time. I see one question from Carrie, so I'm gonna read that. I don't know how long she has. So she asked, how would an ESOP fit into a single owner S Corp company? They wouldn't be able to sell all of their shares that way, right? Question mark.
It doesn't make sense as a one-person company because you're already the sole owner, you're the only employee, you're the only one in the ESOP. It just doesn't make sense. It has to be a multiple employee company for it to make sense. And wouldn't even consider an ESOP until the firm has more than, let's say, subjective, but let's say 15 employees. It wouldn't, because there are costs of putting it in, costs to maintain it. Uh-oh.
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. She said she's clarifying that they have employees, but there's only one owner.
Oh, well, it doesn't matter how many there start. It's the ownership in the ESOP ultimately ends up in the hands of the employees. The fact that it's starting with one almost always starts with one or two, sometimes 3, but that's rare. So it starts with 1. It always does.
Awesome. I think we answered her question. Cool. I don't see anything else, so keep on going. Still got 15 people hanging out, so.
Okay. So I want to demonstrate the years it takes to transfer ownership and kind of why with these 2 different approaches. And on the left, how many years it takes to transfer with an ESOP, and on the right, how many years to transfer without an ESOP. And embedded in these are a lot of industry averages. And so your firm will vary from these things, but if you ever wondered what the industry average is, here they are. The industry average firm is operating at about a 3 multiplier. And the indirect wages, or the utilization of most firms, the industry average is 63%. And then the profit, 15%. No, it was maybe 16% last year, but indulge me, 15%. It's right about what the average firm will make. And then it pays 3 or 3.5% into a retirement plan. On the ESOP side, we're putting 3.5% in, a little bit more. Without an ESOP, we're keeping it right at 3%. We're using more in the ESOP because we know we're going to use the funds to come right back and buy shares. So we get some more money out of that otherwise expense, and it makes us more willing to spend a bit more on it. Then we have the profit that's after the retirement plan contribution. We split it into thirds, a performance bonus, an owner bonus, and a retained amount. And then we can value the firm, and we can value the firm based on its profit pre-distribution, or we're valuing this firm on the profit before bonus line. And a typical firm is valued at about 3 times its profit before bonus, or its average profit before bonus. In this case, $1 million firm is making a $150,000 pre-distribution profit. After it funds the ESOP and the 2 bonuses, it has $43,000 of net income. It's valued at $450,000. And that ESOP contribution up above of $18,527 can buy 4% of the value of the firm. So we know how much that annual ESOP contribution can move the ownership if we were to use it for ownership. Now we're going to look at the direct ownership side on the bottom part of this. We pay a performance bonus, and it shrinks away into those 3 places. Not everyone is going to be offered the opportunity to buy shares. Maybe half the people are, half of them aren't. maybe only half of the total money is going in the hands of people who will be given an offer to buy shares. And then some of them don't reinvest. Let's say that only 25%, 3/4 of the people say, yeah, I'll buy the shares. But then those people that are buying have to pay income tax, and let's assume that's around 24%. So we get about 12,490 back for reinvestment with our performance bonus of $43,000. That is enough to turn over 3% of the firm. Well, 4% can be sold to the ESOP and 3% can be sold to employees. That's 7% a year. And in the end, if we did that every year, we'd end up with 15 years to transfer. And that's kind of maxing out. That's about as quick as that can go. And the return with this ESOP is the owner bonus goes to owners, and the share price increase and the net income all come in, and we're basically getting a 19% return on the share price each year with an ESOP. So the question is, why would anyone invest in something that only pays a compounded 19% return? If you can't answer that question, you haven't been investing long enough. That's great return. That's Warren Buffett type return. And on the other side, we have no ESOP. So the amount that goes into the profit sharing plan is invested in mutual funds. That allows us to actually sweeten up the bonus to 40% a little bit, because we didn't put it in the retirement plan. And even though we're paying a thicker, now we're using a valuation formula of book value plus an average of earnings. And instead of getting a $450,000 value, the firm's worth only $314,000. The formula value produces a lower price than an ESOP appraisal value. And here's an example of what that might be, the difference between 314 and 450. And even though we're selling the firm at a lower price, if we go down the mechanics of the higher bonus, 50% doesn't go into the hands of buyers. Maybe more people actually decide to buy. Only 20% slips away. And the reason is the return's a little higher when we get to the bottom line. They're paying the same income tax. They have $16,000 to reinvest, but they're buying a firm that costs less. That direct approach now can buy 5% of the firm. And if we run that long enough, that's a 20-year transfer horizon. And that's where we started the presentation of it takes about 20 years to do this without an ESOP, and it takes about 10 years to do it with. And the return, the owner bonus is high, the net income is there, and when we put the two in and we're dividing by a lower purchase price, the direct ownership transfer is a 26% return to each buying shareholder, which is not only good, it becomes compelling that it's very hard at that kind of return, but nevertheless, it still takes 20 years to turn the firm over, even with the 26% return, and paying out a third of the total firm's 40% of the firm's money is going into the hands of buyers. So it's less tax efficient, but it certainly ends up putting ownership in the hands of the right individuals to lead the firm long term. So typical failure points in an ownership transfer plan, employees that choose not to mentor others, that they don't recognize that they're part of a collaborative system, that they succeed when everyone succeeds, and they begin to modify their behavior to look out for the welfare of all the firm's employees. Sometimes you'll sell some people's shares, and as soon as they have a few shares, they expect to have veto power of any investment. It's not rational. It's with this process becomes an education of what it means to be a shareholder. And what it certainly doesn't mean is a veto power. I own a few Berkshire Hathaway shares. I've never once even thought I should call Warren and tell him what I think about anything. My shares don't get me anything but a right to participate in the firm's dividend and share price increase. If I owned enough of them, I'd make a phone call. And they don't accept the need to invest to become an owner. That is, sometimes individuals say, why do I have to buy these shares? I know people at other firms that are just given the ownership. I know blah, blah. It's like, well, the only reason they're being asked to buy shares is because they make a 26% or 19% compounded annual return if you do. And if you don't, then you don't get that return. And there's a reason why the firm needs capital. People, the founders and owners, when they're retired, are entitled to take out their capital. And there's a clear and compelling reason for a next generation to want to invest in that opportunity, but they need to put money in order to do that. And quite often in professionals, the great, sometimes extremely high performing individual ends up with an overly self-centered view about the contributions of others to the organization. And a collaborative, high functioning firm with an internal ownership transfer plan has to kind of get past all of these failure points by educating or selecting from the audience those individuals that can work within a collective investment environment. Firms can have another set of failure points different than the individuals. Sometimes firms don't reward the staff sufficiently or differentially. A lot of times they'll take a performance bonus and they'll spread it out uniformly across entire segments of the staff without recognizing that some individuals are bringing more to the table through their performance every year. If this is going to work, you have to differentiate people and reward those high performers higher. You can't limit ownership to just a few people. In the end, about 60% of your employment base would ultimately naturally find themselves as owners over a 5-year period of time if you started an internal ownership transfer. It has to be a larger audience because the performance bonus is going out to everyone in portion, and you need to broaden your ownership to retrieve that performance bonus back. Sometimes, and not too often, but major owners will take too much of the total compensation. They don't recognize that the employees are in fact as integral as they are, and that deserve a higher share of the total compensation. And they ultimately don't buy into this philosophy I've just espoused, that they don't understand the impact of the philosophy of broadly distributed ownership. By that, I mean, not only do we have a group of 17 companies making 24% a year, but firms that have implemented this to 20 to 30 years. So many of them I've started with firms that are 30, 35 people, and today they're somewhere between 250 and 750 employees. And none of them ever intended to get there. They were a 35-person firm with the same expectations that any 35-person firm would have. They just want to get through another year, do as best they can, make some money, pay some bonuses, and carry on. And yet, once you put in place this philosophy of meritocracy, collective ownership, and cure the hard edges of individuals with the wrong attitudes about ownership, you end up in an environment that intrinsically is more likely to grow. It's like watering and fertilizing your garden instead of neglecting it. And the net result over a long period of time is a much bigger harvest. And as usual, I end these things rather abruptly. That's the end of today's presentation. It's time for Q&A.
I love that. That was awesome. Well, you can take a second to breathe because I know a lot of talking for you. So there are some good questions in the chat box and a lot of thank yous for the people that hopped off. They said excellent presentation. So we'll start with that.
Thanks.
So Liz had a question and she says, or she asked, when hiring a consultant for ownership transition, what are some questions we should ask? That's a great question.
I would honestly, you just saw it. If you had any questions after seeing the presentation, those would be great questions, whatever they are. But what you would want to know before just hiring one is, what is their philosophy of ownership transfer planning? I keep mine kind of close to my vest. I don't tell anyone what I really want to do. I mean, when people hire me, man, I have told you what I intend to do. If that's not what you want to do, get someone else. But that should be with the next guy too, whoever that is. What's your plan? What would you do? And if they go, well, we look at the situation and we design a program based on the firm's unique character, that's bull. These firms, these do not wrap themselves around you. These approaches are designed for professional collaboration of design professionals. This system was designed for architects and engineers. Probably wouldn't work with lawyers, probably wouldn't work with accountants. The dynamics of their businesses are different. And by that, I mean, the rainmakers in accounting and law are much higher percentage compared to the rainmakers of architects and engineering. That the engineers and architects always end up working directly with many clients, and the principals that might have won the business initially are not integrally involved in every project because they can't be. And as a result, there's a much higher power in the hands of the professionals, architects and engineers, and they need to be brought into the system so that they share a collective desire to be and operate on behalf of the firm. Somebody has turned into Catwoman here. It's a.
Is there a cat?
I'm going to have to go get my dog. Carol, I see you.
Oh, she has turned into
Oh,
Catwoman.
I can't see her now, though. She's gone.
Sorry.
Embarrassed
Sorry.
her.
I don't know. It's just one of those little Goldie faces. See how cute? There he is.
All right, just for the
Oh,
record,
Thank you for sharing cats.
there's
Thank you.
Riley underneath the
Yeah,
sound asleep there.
Yeah.
All right.
that is awesome. Thank you, Carol. That was beautiful. Carrie had another really great question. She asked, can you do both an ESOP and a 401k safe harbor contribution?
Almost every plan that had an ESOP is alongside of a 401k. I would never supplant one for the other. I think the 401k should be there for salary deferrals. Any money that anyone wants to save goes into a 401k. It should be fully vested. Well, it is by law. It is their money, and they invest it as they see fit, and all that's great. But when the firm starts matching it or making contributions on top of that, I think the firm does have the prerogative then to direct those to an ESOP where they will be used both for mutual funds as well as company stock, because then the company in two gets a benefit out of it and the employee gets a benefit out of it. The employee's benefit is they're working for a firm that has a more secure long-term capital base.
Awesome. Patrick had a really interesting question. He asked, what if you want to transfer ownership, but you do not want to grow?
You can do that. I would say, in fact, it's in some ways easier. Easier because transferring ownership in a growing firm is like trying to buy a house that you're constantly remodeling. You're always spending money on a new bedroom or a new floor or a new wing of the house, and at the same time trying to guarantee that if somebody leaves, you'll cash them out. The growing firms, growing accounts receivable is a constant cash consumer, and it leaves less available for cash bonuses, and consequently, it's harder to transfer a growing business. It's not the growth that makes it transferring. It's the fact that firms with this philosophy tend to grow because their customers keep coming and keep referring them and keep relying on the project managers that have been put in front of them and keep asking for more work. And all of a sudden, the firm just left. Our customers need it. And they just tend to grow, but not because we're going to grow. And I'm not, growth does have some good financial consequences, but really a good consequence is taking care of your client base and growing with your client base so someone else doesn't get their head under the tent and push you out. So that being said, you want to be able to accommodate growth because it is in your best financial interest. It is what the customers want from you, and you ultimately try to perform for their best interests. But if you don't grow, and I have a geotech firm that was 30 people 20 years ago and 30 people today. They're at the top of this profit list. Their number is bringing the average way up. They just mint money and they don't grow fast, and they have turned their ownership over with this hybrid approach. They're on their fourth president. Founder has since passed. Next guy's retired. Next guy's retired. Next guy's retiring in 2 years. The fifth guy's about to come in. They've done a great job of developing staff, and that's the hard spot. They've managed it. Sometimes when small organizations that you just keep your staff, you don't ever end up with a next natural leader. They have figured out how to create that leader again and again and again. It's not like it can't be done. It should be done. It has to be done. When a founder leaves, you need to have it within a non-growing organization, the next individual that can lead and carry the ball.
Perfect response. Patrick, I hope that answered your question, or just, yeah, there's just tons and tons. I'm gonna keep going until you tell me no. Next question from Ashley. What are the first steps to planning for a company with an owner looking to transition in less than 15 years, approximately 10?
They come to grips with what an ESOP is and put it in from the get-go. I usually will start firms and say, look, you don't need to decide now. Let's start with a direct ownership plan. Let's get your team in place. Let's consider it when it becomes an issue. You'll know, I'll know when it's time to bring it up, and then we'll look at how it fits over what you're doing now and what you plan to do. And yes, I've gone 10 years, 15 years, and then put it in. But you want to finish in less than 10, you're going to need an ESOP.
Just call you.
Yeah, and be prepared to fund it at a higher level than 3.5%. And I don't mean 5% is hugely more than 3.5%.
Perfect. Sarah had an awesome question. When and how do you announce the transition plan, especially in a small firm? That's a great question.
Announce it. Yeah, it's interesting. Let's say, because we have harder problems with announcing mergers and acquisitions because things are going to change. Transition plans are, hey guys, we're going to select some of you, and we're going to make offers of ownership to you, and we're going to have you come to a presentation, and someone will explain to you what the deal is, and then we'll pay bonuses in a month or two, and then make offers in a couple more weeks after that, and hang on to your money because you're going to need it if you want to buy ownership. And then you go through that process, and about March, somebody says, here's the value, here's the offer, take it or leave it, and they take it. So there's not one moment where everyone knows there's going to be an ownership transfer. They just don't know what it's going to be, right? When this guy gets too old, he's going to die. Look at me, I used to be a young man. I can assure you the only assumption we can make here is if another year goes by, we're all going to be a year older. And anyone that owns a firm probably won't be that owner 25 years from now. So everyone knows there's going to be a transition. They just don't know if it's going to be abrupt or incremental, or if it's going to be to another party or the people that are working there. So it usually is extremely well received to call in a group of people and say, we're going to start offering ownership incrementally to you as key employees, but you're free to take or leave as you see fit. And nobody walks away from that. They go, I'm listening. Convince me. How did it work across through design?
Yeah, so I was just thinking that too. So yeah, I was gonna ask you, so when you do those meetings, because we did one, that we did it separately with the team that was being offered, and then the firm as a whole. And so we had a couple people we knew were gonna ask questions like, why didn't I get offered it? And so we were prepared, and we were like, okay, here's the behaviors and mindsets and skill sets of what it's going to take to be offered, and if you want to path towards that, here's what we can do, kind of thing. But yeah, we ran into that with a couple people that were they were quite upset they weren't offered shares. Yeah.
And that is, let me just speak to it generally.
Mm-hmm.
If I sold it as all a bill of wonderfulness, this meritocracy means choices are made, people are rewarded, people are unrewarded. You don't penalize anyone, but not rewarding one person while rewarding another is a penalty. It's going to be interpreted that way. Giving someone an offer and not giving another person an offer is a message. And you are forced through the whole system to make the annual decision to pay out the bonus differentially, to make the offers and not make them equal, to select some and not select others, and not make the offers always equal. And constantly there's this feedback loop of how you are going to get rewarded. It doesn't, reminds me a lot of a sports team. It's extremely clear without the huge differentials that sports has, that not everyone is equal in an organization, and the higher performers, and someone can perform high for a couple of years and be the winner of the system and then find themselves no longer in the sweet spot. And in the end, there is a bit more turnover of the non-performers in this approach than there are in one for all for one, let's all be happy firms. And I don't mean to denigrate them by calling them that, because they have lower turnover, and that can be a good thing. But what they also don't have is the meritocracy, the drive for performance, the people that are most likely to leave in the one for all for one firms are the high performers.
Perfect response. So a couple more. Liz had another question. She asked, how are ownership consultants typically compensated? Are they hourly, flat fee, based on firm revenue? That's a good question.
There's a hourly rate, and then sometimes I'll play music and busk for, tips, I suppose. It's all fee for service. That's so critical. There's no percentages, no contingencies, no incentive compensation. It's fee for service, time and materials. Hard to do lump sum because we're trying to respond to what the client wants, and you don't know what the client wants, and telling them how much they're going to want before they even ask for anything is crazy. It's just like a lawyer.
Totally.
Only different.
Just better. Yeah.
Yeah.
Ashley was piggybacking on Sarah's question. She asked, what happens if or when you approach the current employees and they have no interest in becoming an owner?
And you know something you need to hear. Yikes. And the answer has at times been, then you need to find some other key people, and that doesn't happen overnight. But the sooner you know that, that's a game changer. It's like, I don't want to own your firm. I don't even want to own a piece of your firm.
Yeah.
Oh,
Agreed. Yeah,
it takes a little patience from the time you hear one of those messages to kind of regroup, but that definitely causes you. Firms that have internal ownership transfer plans recruit differently. They go looking for people that want to be owners. They don't bring in people that don't want to be owners. They promise that they will be offered ownership if they come. They follow through on that promise. It changes who they get in the recruiting process and the mindset of the employees. You end up with a bunch of people that want to be owners.
Awesome. And then Carrie had a question. I think she has two. So first one is, would the consultant be the one educating the staff on what it means to be in an ESOP, but not be a real owner with veto power, et cetera? That's the first question. So.
Yes, I'm often the person that lays out how the system works and how the rules of ESOPs work, set by the IRS. Yeah. It's easier for me to do it than internally. It's odd is that I pick a profession where there was a clear entry point for an outside party, because if you're the owner and you're talking about how this ESOP is going to be good for you, it just doesn't sound right. Third party consultant comes in and I said, I didn't even know what an ESOP is when I got here 3 weeks ago. I think an ESOP would be good for you, and here's why. And what is my axe to grind? I'm not going to win or lose. I'm trying to help organizations build sustainable, long-term growing, healthy firms. That's my mission. So, and I don't get paid any more or less for whatever, but I can explain the rules all day long.
Totally. Yeah, I loved it when you did it for us, and Mike even did a modeling for each employee at the growth rate, and here's the anticipated amounts, and so they could kind of just see when they would start seeing a return. And so yeah, you were instrumental in making that happen. And then last question, I know we're at 1:30, so we're gonna let you.
Okay.
So this one was also from Carrie, and she asked, how or when do these indirect owners become actual business owners? And how does a company ensure that the right people are the ones that end up as official owners, as in architect firms need architects as owners?
Oh, yes, definitely. See, that's the whole direct ownership plan. Well, again, which I just described, sometimes starts years ahead of the ESOP. And I think it's usually nice when there's enough time to do it that way. The direct ownership approach is just paying a bonus. You have the key people in a room say, we're going to be offering you ownership. Here's the deal. This is the agreement. Here's the documents. Here's how we value the firm. Here's the model of what we think could happen through incremental sales. Again, take your bonus, invest it if you want. We're going to give you an opportunity to own. And you see if you can't, over 3 to 5 years, put together a team of kind of committed individuals that are into the game and want to play it long term. And then at that time, you introduce, if you need, an ESOP. And that ESOP says, in addition to you 5 who will continue to own and more to follow you in the same footsteps, we are also going to start using some of the profit sharing money. The 401k match is going to start going into an ESOP. And then we're going to use that money to buy shares on behalf of all employees. And because it's all employees and they're not selected, we're happy that they don't have a vote, and that their investments are trustee directed. But then they start participating in the returns of the firm's stock too, which we do want them to do, just without the control that would normally go with it.
Totally. She says, thank you. So what about if the firm gets sued, and is there a difference between being like a very minority owner, like 1 to 5%, or is it you're an owner so you get wrapped into it? What about that?
Yeah, I think the principal concern we have is professional liability.
Yeah.
I laugh, which is a topic I know something about. Being the insurance agent for 4,500 design firms nationwide. Professional liability doesn't work the way most people think it does, but it's personal liability, and it can pierce the corporate veil. That is, if you're a design professional and stamp and drawing, you're responsible for that work. The corporation is, yes, they can be sued. And if the corporation runs out of insurance, you can be sued personally. And you could both, they could start with both of you at the beginning if they wanted to. They tend not to. If you're the owner and you didn't work on the job, then your corporation gets sued, but you can't get sued. You didn't do any of the work. Only the person who stamped the drawing is the one primarily responsible for the work. And all the people that worked on the work but didn't stamp the drawing aren't responsible either. So that stamp should just say liability is mine. That's what it should say, because that's the way it works. And what we try to make sure is that the corporation has sufficient insurance so that there's no interest in going outside of it. That doesn't mean there can't be claims that are higher than insurance limits. That typically someone might be buying 1 and we'd say you need 2. And then if we got 2, we can get them up to 5. And we do that because if they have a claim, if there was a $10 million claim on a $5 million insurance firm, what they know is they're only going to get 5. And if they want to bring in the person who stamped the drawing, they might get 5.3. But if they want to get 5.3, it's going to take them 7 to 12 years to get it, because nobody is going to give up the personal $300,000 without a fight to the death. And then the person says, I can get 5 today, or I can get 5.3 after a 4-year fight. I'll take the 5. The way you get out is to make sure you have enough limit to settle. That doesn't mean enough to pay for all the damages, even in a worst case scenario, but sufficiently more than some individual who could otherwise be tormented, but also has the power not to settle and force the other side into years of protracted battle, which causes them to take the money and settle. We've never seen somebody personally sued, but the key is to make sure that the limit is just sufficient enough that the personal wealth isn't there to motivate the ongoing claim.
I love that. So you've never seen anybody get personally sued?
Sued but never settled. They always settle. I've never seen anyone get to the end of court.
Yeah. Same. Well, Mike, I think those are all the questions. There's a lot of thank yous, a lot of great presentation.
Oh,
So
what a pleasure. Thank you, everyone.
it's fantastic. And I will give a call later and check in with you. And I'm gonna get the recording out, and happy Thanksgiving to everybody next week. We're excited to see Danielle in a couple weeks in December for the next presentation. And Mike, we'd love to have you back anytime.
Oh, thank you. What a pleasure. Thank you, everyone.
Well,
Thanks.
thank you, guys. Breathe, go get some lunch. Bye, guys.
Bye.